Today we're making pretzels. Oktoberfest was canceled this year, as it was correct to do, but really, I don't need that kind of excuse. Big pretzels are one of my favorite things ever. I used to get one every single time I went to the mall, back when malls were like a thing. But these are no chain kiosk, over-conditioned, butter-drenched, dinner roll-adjacent pretzel. They're the real deal. Authentic as hell. Kinda. Pretty much every German recipe blog gave volumetric measurements, not by weight, but that makes me stressed, so I did some average conversions when creating this recipe. Anyway, let's get into it. We'll begin with 150 grams of warm water for 6 pretzels, to which we'll add a little barley malt syrup, or once again in my case, dark corn syrup. I genuinely don't measure this, maybe 10 to 15 grams. Whisk that until dissolved, and then add in 6 grams of active dry yeast, and then whisk that in too. We're going to make a sponge here, which is a type of pre-ferment, but really the reason we're using it is to allow some of the gluten development and flour hydration before we add in the fat, which does inhibit gluten development. So to this, we will add 100 grams of flour once our yeast has hydrated for a minute, and we'll whisk that in until it's a totally smooth batter. You don't have to do it in 2 additions like this. I'm not really sure why I did. And then we are not going to add any salt to the dough. They will get plenty on the outside later. And once that's totally whisked together and smooth, just leave it alone for about 20 to 30 minutes. And here you can really see why it's called a sponge. To that, we're going to add 3 tablespoons or 43 grams of melted butter that has been allowed to cool off a little bit so that it's not really hot going into the dough. And we are going to whisk that in extremely thoroughly. We're going to add an additional 200 grams of flour at this point, which I once again inexplicably do in 2 additions. Can't explain it, sorry. Whatever my reasoning, work in as much of that as you can with the spatula, and then once the dough is too stiff to reasonably work with the utensil, switch to kneading in the rest of the flour by hand. It will absolutely take it all. You do not need to worry about adding in any more water than this. Once the flour is kneaded in and the dough is uniform, you just form it into a ball, place it back in the bowl, and cover it with a clean towel for about an hour and a half. One period of time later, punch down your dough and toss it onto your work surface. No need to flour it, the dough isn't sticky in the least. You're going to divide your dough into 6 equal pieces, 80 to 85 grams per piece. You don't have to weigh them, this isn't really exact work. But I'm an exact person, and maybe you are too. Form each piece into a tight little bowl as you go. Once your bowls are formed, we're going to pretty immediately roll them into long ropes. How long and how thin depends entirely on how thick you like your pretzels. My research leads me to believe that relatively thin is more traditional, so that's what I do here, but authenticity is a sham, make them how you like. If you feel any air bubbles, make sure you squish those out. An air bubble inside the rope will lead to a weak point that'll break during the shaping and stretching. You want your dough as deflated as possible here. I've cleverly edited out the several times that I had a damn near complete pretzel and then a bubble I didn't decide to choose that moment to give. Probably just squash your bowls totally flat before rolling. That's what I start doing on like pretzel number 4. Anyway, once they're long and as thin as you want, shaping is really easy. You just bring it up into a U shape and then cross the ends over each other at least once and probably no more than 4 times. 3 is my favorite here. And then you fold the ends down to the bottom of the U and press and seal them to the bottom. Tuck them under if you like, but that's a little fussy. Optionally but recommended, hook your fingers into the ears and tug them out, stretching them into a more oblong shape. Transfer onto parchment paper or a silpat and repeat times 5. Don't worry about them looking too beautiful right now, the process will cover many sins. Now, my setup here is nearly identical to my bagel video. Oven preheated to 500 degrees, 2 greased sheet pans on standby, and a pot of near boiling water. Major differences here are that the pot is a wok because I need the extra water surface area to make 3 pretzels at once, and that the water is not at a rolling boil, but an absolute bare simmer. In the wok is 8 cups of water, and that is important to measure because we add a quarter cup of baking soda and we want that ratio to remain. My uncooked pretzels have only been resting for as long as it took to get this rig set up. It's okay if they have not fully risen yet, they'll do that in the water and in the oven. Transfer in your pretzels, as many as can comfortably swim in your vessel, and once you've got them in, set a timer for 20 to 30 seconds, then flip them and time for another 20. And then transfer to your baking sheet and immediately salt them while they're still wet. I'm using pretzel salt specifically here. Is that required? Well, no, you're the unquestioned ruler of your kitchen, but it is excellent. As opposed to coarse sea salts or kosher salt, which are both large individual crystals and thus hard, pretzel salt is much tinier crystals compressed into a small pebble, which easily breaks apart between the teeth and is thus crisp. It's only like $7 to order on Amazon, and absolutely you should if you can. By the way, yes, I absolutely ruined 2 of those. One of them broke, and the other's arms came unstuck from the bottom. Absolutely ruined. Just kidding. I just stuck the 2 broken ends back together and put everything back in place, and it sealed as it baked, and it came out beautifully, and you couldn't tell at all. Present your failures confidently, and no one will ever question you. Anyway, do the same thing with the rest of the pretzels. It's fine if your first batch just chills on the countertop so you can bake everything at once. They're going to bake for 12 to 15 minutes, essentially until they're as brown as you want them to be. While they bake, it's as good a time as any to make some beer cheese or maybe Welsh rabbit. I've never made either one, and I literally did not even check how it's done, but it still came out decently, and so here's what I did. Pardon the streaky stovetop, by the way, the baking soda water didn't wipe up as well as I thought. I just start with a basic roux by melting a tablespoon of butter in a small saucepan, and I add a tablespoon of flour and whisk that until smooth. Let it cook for just a moment, and then I add a cup of a decent lager. I add that in about 3 additions, whisking each one until it's totally smooth before I add in the next, and then I cook that until it's lightly thickened. Once all the beer was worked in, I added in a tablespoon or so of Dijon mustard and whisked that in, and then let it come up to a boil, and took it off the heat and worked in 6 ounces of a mild cheddar, a little bit at a time, moving it back onto the heat if it seemed like it had cooled off too much to melt the next addition. It was quite tasty, but it was extremely beer forward. The cheese and mustard both took a back seat here. And that's it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what you'd like to see me make a recipe for. Till next time.